From the Oklahoman newsroom, you're watching the Red Zone, our video formerly known as Football Friday. We're trying out Red Zone for the day, guys. If you got better suggestions out there in video land, you know where to find us, social, email. We'll take suggestions for a few weeks. But I'm Jenny Carlson, joined by columnist Barry Trammell, OU beat writer Ryan Aber. Guys, it's game week. We've got a lot to talk about as OU finally released a depth chart on Wednesday, but also some ongoing situations, I think maybe the way to think of this, with the tailgating on Saturday. Ryan, what's the latest with this? And I say latest because it may change right after we do this video.
Yeah, we got our third map today from OU, and apparently this was a surprise yesterday, or I guess Tuesday, to the athletic department, that the university said, well, you can't tailgate at all on Lindsay. There's a couple other areas designated that were significantly off Lindsay that were available for tailgating, but the available space was really, really shrunk down. But Lindsay being the biggest one, they released a revised map Tuesday night that gave a little bit more space, not a ton. And then today, finally, David Boren came out and said, we're not going to do this. Gave some more space on Lindsay, further west than what we've been used to, but opened up a little bit more areas for public tailgating.
Barry, what is going on here? I mean, to read what the university was saying on Tuesday, it's about safety. I mean, obviously you got to have safety involved, but new sodding. I mean, there was a lot of things going on here, but what's happening here?
Let me explain to you what happened here. OU threw up some more new dorms, beautiful dorms there on Lindsay Street, just south of the stadium. Somebody higher up, I don't know how high up, but my guess is pretty high, said, you know what? We don't want to clutter up this beautiful new landscaping, these beautiful new buildings with a bunch of people. If you've ever seen the Norman campus late on a Saturday night, or particularly on Sunday morning after a game, it's a mess, and people work throughout the night to clean it up. But it's a major undertaking, and it's not that people are necessarily trashing the place, but you put 80, 90,000 people on a small patch of real estate, things happen. They didn't want people messing with the new dorms. They didn't want them tearing up the grass, didn't want them using the bathrooms, didn't want them cluttering up the looks of the place. So they said, well, let's just make this off limits. And somebody else said, you know what, this wouldn't hurt if we did this here too, and you end up with a new map. And so they send it out. Or just establish it. Somebody gets wind of it, puts it in the newspaper, and you know what happened, a firestorm. So what happened was OU officials, not athletic department, because they knew. People in the university had no idea what a big deal this was. They learned on Tuesday what a big deal it was, then later even more so. That's why we've had 3 renditions of this. We might have more. Stay tuned.
Power to the people, Ryan. In my mind, people made a fuss about this, said my spot's gone, or you know, there's just not enough room. Sounds like they at least listened to that.
Absolutely, and I think David Boren has shown the ability to listen to folks when they get outraged about certain subjects. We've seen that a couple times over the years, but this is certainly one that drew a lot of phone calls to David Boren's office, and he reacted and made some changes that are going to open things up at least a little bit more than they were going to be for Sooners fans.
Well, and this is probably going to continue to be something of an issue, because that space around the stadium, which used to have some open areas for parking, there was grassy areas, they continue to develop that, Headington Hall, and now we see the dorm across the street. Barry, this seems like this is probably going to be something they're going to have to continue to address and figure out ways to accommodate people who want to get together on game day beyond just being in the stadium. Well,
yeah, and think about the athletic department's role in this. I mean, these are people like all across America, a professional, college. They're struggling with getting people to come to the games compared to the viewing experience at home. And one of the things that draws people to a college campus is the tailgating experience. Not everybody does it. Maybe not even half the crowd does it. But a big tens of thousands of people do it. And if you say, you can't do this anymore, that's one more reason for them to stay home. That's it's a very serious situation for the ticket sellers. So it's a major issue. And it comes at a time when, as you mentioned, the development is massive at OU and OSU, lots of places, and the landscape, the real estate is contracted. There's just not as many places. One problem at OU is near the stadium, there's not a huge chunk of real estate that you could just say, hey, everybody go there and make that the headquarters for tailgating. At OSU, you got the big parking lot south of Boone-Pickens Stadium. Ole Miss, of course, famous for the Grove, where just thousands and thousands of people congregate. OU does not have a place big enough to accommodate people like that. That's why OU's tailgate has been splintered and sort of spread out in a lot of places. But the most high-profile place was right there along Lindsay, south of the stadium, and that's what caused the uproar.
Well, Barry, though, I wonder. I heard this a lot yesterday as this uproar was going on. What would you think about opening the South Oval to some tailgating and having some folks congregating there? I know a lot of people mentioned the Grove and Ole Miss and that atmosphere. Is that something that's doable?
Doable, yes. Passable, no. Because here's the deal: the South Oval's a beautiful place at OU. It's right there off Lindsay, and you go north towards the library. It's a gorgeous spot. They keep it spotless. They keep it manicured. And that's the problem. Right. It won't be spotless. It won't be manicured after a home game. And frankly, it's a little bit like Humpty Dumpty's wall. It's hard to put back together the way it was after a home game. I think that's going to be a tough one to get over the censors.
So on Humpty Dumpty reference, I feel like it's time to move on. But we'll see. 3 maps. Maybe we'll go for a 4th. Will OU put out more tailgating maps than, Baker Mayfield throws touchdown passes on Saturday? We'll see. But let's talk a little bit about the football, guys. And let's start with this depth chart that came out. We're going to dive into this a little bit, or a lot. Ryan, let's start with the running back situation. Still a lot of questions, or a lot of ors.
Yeah.
Lincoln Riley said on Monday that he didn't want to put out a depth chart with a bunch of ors on it.
He said 15. It was the number. He threw out a specific number. It did not have 15 on it. There were some, though.
Well, what do you make, especially of the running back situation? Because that is such a question mark area to have it pretty obvious that there's still not a clear guy that's emerged from that group.
Yeah, I think that they really don't know what they have, and they don't know if they've got that one guy that they can rely on like they've relied on a few the last couple years. They think Rodney Anderson, Marcellus Sutton, those guys, Abdul Adams, have potential, but they haven't seen a guy just take over that spot, and I think that's a little concerning, not only to me as an observer, but I think to Lincoln Riley and his offensive staff, that they haven't seen a guy really grasp that. They hope that it happens in game action, but right now all 3 of those guys listed as interchangeable at number 1 on the depth chart.
Barry, I think you said a week ago as we were talking about this that running backs will fall out of the trees almost without even looking for them. Do you still believe that? Or does this depth chart release give you any pause for alarm on what Oklahoma might have at running back?
I don't put a lot of stock into all this non-committal stuff. One problem they've got is this. None of these guys have played. Rodney Anderson's been on campus. This is his 3rd season. He's played a game and a half and didn't play much in those games.
2 carries, I think.
Yeah,
career.
so, I mean, they've seen virtually nothing out of him and literally nothing out of the other guys. Adams played a little bit last year.
Adams actually is the most experienced.
Probably so. But think of the problems. People don't hit in August like they used to. We don't scrimmage in Norman and Stillwater and Austin and Lubbock and any place across America. They just don't hit like they used to. In the old days, there were 3 or 4 major scrimmages every August on a college campus. Not anymore. Those running backs are the guys you probably learn the most about in a live scrimmage. So I actually think that they really just going to wait and let the ball games sort this out.
I know this is an OU video, but I remember a year ago when OSU was talking about who's starting at running back before the season started, and it was a lot of ors. Barry J. Sanders, or Jeff Carr, or Justice Hill, on down the list. Once they got going, it became obvious who the guy should be. It was Justice Hill, Big 12 Freshman of the Year. Could this be a situation like that? I'm sure Lincoln Riley hopes so, Ryan.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he wants one of those guys to really stand out and take over that role the way that Justice Hill did a year ago. I mean, it could be any of the 3. We know about Rodney Anderson's physicality. He certainly looks the part. He looks physically a lot like Samaje Perine did. Abdul Adams has drawn rave reviews for his improvement, especially in catching the ball out of the backfield. We didn't see much from him a year ago, and then obviously Marcellus Sutton, the junior college transfer, we haven't seen much of him at all after he was banged up a little bit in the spring, but they really hope that one of those guys pulls a Justice Hill and starts to separate themselves.
All right, guys, let's talk about the other offensive position that has people concerned, and that's wide receiver. And this depth chart that's just probably the most interesting position as you look at this depth chart that got released. Barry, no Jeff Badette starting. I thought he was going to save the season. What are we to make of this?
I don't put a lot of stock into it, but I reserve the right to change my mind by 6 o'clock Saturday night. C.D. Lamb starting, Jeff Badette not starting. I think that's an indication of the adjustment period for Jeff Badette, who did not go through spring practice. Got here, didn't really know the system. He talked earlier this week about how first week or two he had major adjustment issues in practice, learning the plays, learning the system, learning the way things are done, those kinds of things. But Lincoln Riley has mentioned that Badette has really come on. I expect he will play a bunch. I don't know if he'll be the go-to guy, but I do think he will play a bunch. I was surprised C.D. Lamb, true freshman, is listed #1 out there, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, the thing I would say about this, Ryan, is we know a lot of these guys are going to have to play. It's not like Jeff Badette is not going to be on the field.
Absolutely.
I mean, both those guys are going to play and play a lot, right?
Yeah, pretty much everybody on this two deep at wide receiver is going to see some significant playing time. The thing that stood out to me the most, though, was Mikel Jones listed as an or at one of those inside receiver spots with Miles Tees, a walk-on wide receiver at the other possible starting spot. And that's a name that we had talked about a little bit. Lincoln Riley had thrown out his name. We've heard Cale Gundy throw out his name. But it's one of those things you're like, okay, we'll see when the games actually start.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out when the depth chart came out, his name was right there as a potential starter, which was pretty surprising given his background. He played at UCO for a couple years, had a pretty good sophomore season there,
yeah,
but set out last year after transferring, and then all of a sudden he's on the two deep.
Third straight year, at least, that a walk-on has impacted the wide receiver corps.
Well, and there's two on this. You look at Lee Morris, who I wrote about today, is listed, I think, third at that tight end / Y receiver, I think is what they call it. One of the slot in the other inside spots. I mean, Mark Andrews doesn't play a tight end, let's be honest. But we've got Mark Andrews, Grant Calcaterra, the freshman, who is a tight end, and then Lee Morris at third there. And they didn't list three at very many positions.
I got to tell you guys, I don't know what to make of Miles Tees because UCO, walk on after he transferred. This is either going to be the best feel-good story of the year, or it's a advanced blaring alarm about what's happening at wide receiver. I think I'm willing to let it play out, but it seems like it's one of the two, Barry. If you've got, guys that should be sort of taking those wide receiver spots by the horns and saying, this is mine, it's my time, I'm ready to go. And instead, this guy comes in and takes one of those or starting spots. What does that signal?
I don't know if they're trying to light a fire under Mikel Jones. I don't know if the tease has just blossomed great the way Jarvis Baxter showed up and say, hey, I'm going to start. Last year, Nick Basquin finally rewarded for some patience and perseverance. Maybe it is one of those feel-good stories, but it is a little odd that Mikel Jones, so highly recruited and highly regarded, hasn't solidified that slot.
Well, when we talk about offense and the depth chart, a bit of news we found out before this depth chart was released is the backup quarterback situation. Lincoln Riley announcing Monday that Kyler Murray would be the backup and Austin Kendall will redshirt, essentially get the redshirt year that they expected him to get a year ago.
They hoped he would get a year ago.
Yeah, and obviously the quarterback situation sort of changed, before he arrived on campus, Ryan. How much are we going to see Kyler Murray? I mean, I would assume that this first game, there's a chance we could see him significantly. And I guess then the second question would be, what do the Sooners need to see out of Kyler Murray?
Well, the first part about it, I think we're going to see him a whole lot more than we saw Austin Kendall a year ago. We only saw Kendall in 2 games. We saw him play against Louisiana Monroe. We saw him play against Kansas, both in the end of blowout games. Bob Stoops was notorious for waiting until really late in already decided ball games to pull out his starter and insert his backup. I think Lincoln Riley is going to be at least a little bit more open with that. We'll see. But what most intrigues me is the potential of seeing Kyler Murray on the field in different situations. You know, whether they use him and Baker on the field at the same time, as we saw a couple years ago with some of the things that they did with Trevor Knight, or something a little bit different. But what they need from Murray is the ability to take control of this offense. I mean, I think they want him to be the starter next year. He was the five-star guy that everybody talked about out of high school, went to Texas A&M, had some early success, and then backed off of that. Had some struggles before he decided to transfer, but I think they want him to be an electric type player in whatever role they wind up using him for, whether it's a true backup quarterback situation where he's not going to play that much, or somebody that they use a little bit more.
Yeah, and Barry, it's kind of interesting. I mean, Ryan brings up the fact that they did use Knight and Baker in some interesting ways, but it's, you know, it's a situation where you don't need a Kyler Murray to play a wildcat position. Baker Mayfield is that
yeah,
wildcat.
They're very similar players, so it's not like we're talking about adding a complete new wrinkle. I think it's just with Kyler Murray's speed, he's probably not the fastest player on the team, but he's really close. And I know we were talking during the baseball season, then Coach Pete Morris said he was the fastest player in college baseball. Wouldn't really doubt that at this point. But he can change the dynamic of an offense when you've got him running. I think that speed is such a tool for him that they might find ways to use them.
You know,
yeah, but I'm with you, Jacko. I don't like him in a short yardage situation on the goal line.
I don't see any point
the
in
way
that.
The way you saw Blake Bell with the Belldozer a few years ago. If you're not going to get a guy in that can just lower his head and his shoulder and muscle in for a yard or two, keep Baker Mayfield on the field.
Yeah, and I guess that sort of begs the question. How much do they need to get him game experience? Baker Mayfield's your guy in games that there's a question of result. I mean, you got to leave your main guy out there. But Barry, what do you want to see out of Kyler Murray? Would you, I mean, if you're Lincoln Riley, are you hoping you maybe get him out there for a full half? I mean, what's sort of the optimal scenario Saturday?
I would like to see Kyler Murray play more than Bob Stoops' backups played over the years.
You almost played more than Bob Stoops' backups
here's the deal.
some season.
And it's not, I really don't even think it helps experience-wise for the backup. Playing in the second half against UTEP is not like playing, the second quarter against West Virginia. So, but I do think there's no reason to run the risk of injury to a star quarterback when the game's in hand. So I'm not sure that the added speed of Kyler Murray is worth taking a playmaker off the field. Maybe he's faster. I'm pretty sure he's not as good of a receiver. He's a quarterback after all. So I don't know that I need to see him much other than I'd just like to see him out there spelling Baker Mayfield, and he's going to get his chance next year.
All right, let me remind folks you're watching the Red Zone, the video segment formerly known as Football Friday. I'm here with columnist Barry Trammell and OU beat writer Ryan Aber. Guys, let's move over to the defensive side of the ball and some of our impressions from this depth chart release. Ryan, strength of this defense really kind of looks like the secondary, which when you think about where this team was not so long ago, to be saying that, to be thinking that when you look at the depth and the guys who are able to play in that secondary, how did we get here? How did the Sooners get here?
Well, we got here for two reasons, and that's both at the other cornerback spot opposite Jordan Thomas. That was such a big point of contention last year when they lost to Houston, they lost to Ohio State, and they had some struggles in a lot of other games at that spot. The Texas Tech game, which we remember how bad they were at times there. But Jordan Parker really late in the season grabbed a hold of that other cornerback spot and played really well. By the end of the season, they had a pretty good secondary, and it was because of him solidifying things back there. But also Parnell Motley, the massive leap that his game has taken since last year. He was a guy who didn't really see the field much last year, but and I talked to Jordan Thomas earlier this week about Parnell, and he said his footwork Jordan Thomas questioned whether he'd ever see the field during his career because of how bad his footwork was. But he has taken strides and strides and strides and wound up beating out Jordan Parker, who has played pretty well during camp to earn that other cornerback spot. So that really helps their depth there. Will Johnson's health also at safety has really helped them be able to develop some depth behind him, because he's now in a position that they can take advantage of his skills rather than last year when they moved him up to linebacker, which really didn't work out at all.
Barry, we also have to give some recognition to the fact that they've got some true freshmen that are on this two deep. When you look at Robert Barnes backing up Will Johnson at safety, and then Trey Norwood backing up Jordan Thomas, they've gone out and recruited some guys that can come in and play right away. And that, I mean, that's no small thing when it comes to really revamping this secondary, rebuilding it to be a strength of this defense.
Yeah, it's good for the future. You know, they finally built what appears to be a little bit of depth. You know, they went through 3 or 4 corners last year trying to find somebody who could just do a little bit of stoppage. This year they appear to have 3 guys they like for the 2 positions. So that's a big improvement. And you got Stephen Parker at safety and that kind of veteran leadership, and Will Johnson's been around forever. So you got the guys behind him, Chance Sylvie, Robert Barnes, that crowd. It does look like the future's brighter. And while at the same time, it looks like they're pretty well set for this season. So that's a pretty good spot. It is sort of amazing that that the OU secondary has sort of emerged as the bright spot of the defense.
Yeah, and I think I forgot Trey Brown as well.
Yeah, he's listed right behind Trey Norwood, I think, at the that other spot.
Yeah, another freshman out there. So, I mean, Ryan, obviously UTEP is not going to provide the challenge to this secondary that they will see later on. And,
well, really quickly, next week.
Yeah, and then obviously as they move into Big 12 play. But as we talk about what we need to see, or what coaches need to see out of these guys, what would be important on Saturday as it relates to the secondary against UTEP?
Well, I think to see more than just the starters come out and perform well, and to cover well, to not get beat, even without any deep balls, home run type balls from UTEP, but just to see them make the plays that they're supposed to make, be in the right positions, I think would be a really positive thing for this secondary.
All right, let's talk about some other defensive notes that have come off this depth chart. Devonta Lampkin has got to be a big question mark. Where is he on the defensive line? A guy that he played some last year, Barry, drew some rave reviews occasionally too, but not even third team at defensive tackle behind Matt Romar, Marquise Overton. Defensive line seems to be in a pretty good spot, but this seems like a bit of an oddity.
Yeah, I don't know. He's in the doghouse is where he's at now. Why he's in the doghouse, I don't know. Yeah, I personally don't think that OU's overly deep on the defensive line. So if a guy falls way down the depth chart, that's not a good sign.
What about it, Ryan?
Well, we got a chance to watch a couple of open periods of practice this preseason camp, and one of the things I spent some time over at the defensive line watching them work out, and we looked at Devonta Lampkin, and you can see the raw talent. I mean, that's unmistakable. But there were things that concerned me, that he was having to be instructed on this stance, things like that, where to put his feet. And I think that shows that he's a little bit farther behind when you talk about not only Matt Romar and Marquise Overton and the players who have been here for a few years and have that experience, but even Tyrese Lott, the kid from Ardmore, has really skyrocketed up the depth chart. He's a guy that that's been said that he's going to play pretty significant amount of time this season. He's really performed well in this camp, and I think Lampkin is getting overtaken. Now, Ruffin McNeil did say that Devonta Lampkin is the best physical specimen he's ever coached. So if Lampkin can figure out those things, figure out where he's supposed to be, what he's supposed to do with that physicality, then he can be a really good player, but it's just not there. I was pretty surprised to see, and I'm going to butcher his name, but Dylan Famatau, the junior college defensive lineman, to see him. He's a guy that hasn't really been talked about in this camp. We know the talent. He almost went to USC, decided to head to Norman instead, and he's a guy that I didn't anticipate having an impact this year, but it sounds like he might get some playing time.
Barry, you mentioned depth earlier as it relates to the defensive line. You know, we talked about younger guys being needed on the defensive line. Linebackers right now have 5 or 6 guys depending on health and where they are. Does OU have the depth it needs? I think in the secondary we would say yes, but does the overall defense have enough depth? Maybe you can never have enough. I don't know.
I would say no. I mean, that's clearly linebacker. They're short at linebacker, and I think they're a little short on the defensive line. Now, if they get through the season relatively healthy, then it's not that big a deal. But an injury or two could really hurt you, and that's where you need that kind of depth. From when OU's defense was fantastic, that defensive line was about 7 guys deep, and you know, they had 3 or 4 really good ends, and they had 3 or 4 really good tackles. So, you know, if you don't have that, then if you only got a couple of really good players at end, a couple of really good players at tackle, you go into every game sweating.
And I think there's a couple players who are going to be really key, and we talk about this defense and staying healthy, and that's Kenneth Murray, which is funny that we bring up a true freshman as a guy who's that big, but the fact that they hardly have any depth at the inside linebacker spot, that middle linebacker spot. Here's a freshman who has impressed since day one when he got here in January, earned that starting spot, but behind him you've got John Michael Terry, who just missed 3 weeks of practice. You've got Curtis Bolton, who has been a special team star, but we haven't really seen much of him, and he's backing up pretty much everywhere at the linebacker spot. They're just really thin there. I think if Kenneth Murray gets hurt, they could be in a world of trouble. And then Caleb Kelly, just because of his versatility, everything that he lets Mike Stoops do defensively, because you can move him to the inside if you need to. I know they want to use Obo Okoronkwo and Mark Jackson together on the field at times. I think Kelly helps with that. If you lose Kelly, that really changes the amount you can do with the same guys on the field.
Sounds like to me that obviously if you lose Baker Mayfield off this team, that changes everything. But are those 2 linebackers your next most important guys to keep on the field, Ryan?
I think probably so. I mean, we know how good Jordan Thomas is on the back end, but they've got a little bit of depth there. They just don't have depth at linebacker. I mean, talking about that open part of practice that we watched, you know, they don't have Levi Draper. He's out, and that really shrinks the number of players that they have out there. It was pretty shocking to see how few linebackers. Now, part of that is because Obo Okoronkwo and Mark Jackson are up with the defensive ends. They're working with the defensive front, but still, that's pretty eye-opening to see that few players working out there, and they need those guys to work out.
Anybody else that would jump up ahead of those 2 linebackers in your mind, Barry, on terms of importance beyond Baker Mayfield to this team?
Oh, if it's all the same, I'll keep Orlando Brown on the field.
I was about to say, I mean, tackle, they really don't have much depth at tackle either. I mean, they've got Quinn Mittermeier backing up both spots. He's been a big special teams guy the last couple of years, but really outside of him at tackle, they would have to probably move Drew Samia to the outside. They would much prefer to keep Samia at guard and use that 3-guard rotation that they're going to do. So Orlando Brown is as good as anybody to mention as, you know, most valuable player number 2.
All right, you convinced me pretty well. Thanks a lot. Okay, before we go, last thing, guys, let's talk about Lincoln Riley. You'd think we'd talk about him more, but this is his first game, head coach, 33 years old, guys. You know, obviously, we all know what we think is going to happen on Saturday, a dominant Sooner victory. He's going to be 1-0 as a head coach. I'm sure well on his way to that record that Bob Stoops has. But a successful season, Barry, we'll start with you. What would constitute a successful season for Lincoln Riley in your mind?
Big 12 title. Anything less than a Big 12 title is lower than the Oklahoma standard. The college football playoff is great, but the Sooners lose in Columbus, which they could have a fabulous team and lose in Columbus, and they might not make the playoff, even if they ran the table. So to me, the standard for Lincoln Riley is the Big 12 championship.
Ryan?
Well, I think I'm going to go the same answer. The Big 12 championship is what it would take to make a successful season. But I do think if Oklahoma loses in Columbus, unless they just get their doors blown off, if they run out in the Big 12, which would involve 2 wins over the same team, presumably the second highest rated team in the Big 12, they're going to make the 4-team college football playoff. I don't really have any doubt about that. But but you could win the Big 12 championship without running the table in the Big 12, which normally doesn't happen. Happened for OU last year, but I think they've got to win a Big 12 championship in order for Lincoln Riley's inaugural season to be considered a success.
Well, guys, we get a chance to see a game on Saturday. I'm kind of fired up about that. So I don't know what's going to happen this season, but I know we're going to have some football on Saturday night down in Norman. It's
Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, right. 2:30. I almost said 6:30. That's the Thursday game. The other team. All right, 2:30 Saturday. Big Fox if you can't go, but if you can, sounds like it's going to be a beautiful day. I know we'll be there. Be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.